Sahbihi ajma'in amma ba'd. All praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has given us the opportunity to come to His house. We ask Allah to accept our ibadah and forgive our shortcomings. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the khair of this day and protect us from all types of evil. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. We learn from the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam a very important lesson for every single believer, and especially those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala utilizes. One of the things, a common command of Allah to all of His messenger in the Quran about having to practice patience in their lives. وَاصْبِرْ وَمَا صَبْرُكَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ وَلَا تَحْزَنْ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا تَكُ فِي ضَيْقٍ مِّمَّا يَمْكُرُونَ. Allah is addressing His Habib sallallahu alayhi wasallam that have patience, and your patience is only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and do not grieve over the situation that has occurred. Why? إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ مُحْسِنُونَ. Allah is always with those people who practice taqwa in their lives. And these are the people of ihsan, those who do actions in the best way possible in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The hadith which Mullah Ali Qari rahmatullah alayhi has gathered in his collection of Jawami'ul Kalim, the comprehensive speech, is As-sabru ridan. And in addition to this narration is As-sabru ridallah, that patience is the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or patience by itself brings pleasure in your life. Now, patience is over difficult times, and this is a quality that Allah Azza wa Jal recommended and commanded every single prophet of His to practice. Without it, to navigate into the ummah is very difficult, and that is a quality that is required in every leadership position. Without having patience in your life, things can go in a very difficult way, and you will not be able to fulfill the hukum of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because a person who lacks sabr cannot be put into a position where he can take care of the affairs of the entire ummah. So Allah Azza wa Jal commanded every single prophet of His to practice sabr and patience in their lives. And if you look at all those stories of Anbiya alayhimus salam documented, mentioned in the Quran, you will see one common theme, that whenever a prophet came with a difficulty, the first command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was to have patience over the difficulties that you're seeing. Why? Because patience actually develops qualities inside you. It gives you the ability to make decisions based on wisdom. It gives you the ability to look at things from a different perspective and not to be emotionally drawn into situations, not to be emotionally, making decisions on matters. All of this has to do with sabr and patience. Allah Azza wa Jal commands in the Quran that Allah is with those people. Inna Allaha ma'as sabirin. Allah is with the people of patience. Now, patience goes through different categories, and it has different status of people who have patience. Al-Ghazali writes in Ihya that there are three categories of patience. الصبر على طاعة الله والصبر عن معصية الله والصبر على أقدرة الله سبحانه وتعالى. أقضية الله سبحانه وتعالى. That having patience over obedience, having patience over disobedience, and having patience on the decrees of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Having patience over obedience, no matter how difficult the action might be, having patience and doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No matter how tempting a disobedient may be, having patience and staying away from that disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then, no matter what Allah Azza wa Jal decides in your life, being happy and content with the decision of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then it comes sabrul am, sabrul khas, and sabrul arif. Al-Ghazali mentions, and there are three types of people who have patience, who practice patience. There is a patient of normal and layman, a normal person. And that is due to the fear of Allah Azza wa Jal. That a person has fear, and that's why he's having sabr. If I don't have patience, then this will happen to me. That is the lowest category of an individual who practices sabr in their life. The second category he mentions is the pious, the righteous people, right? And they do patience based on obedience, not based on fear, based on obedience. That I'm fulfilling the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and no matter what difficulties I will have patience. Why? Because my duty is to fulfill the ahkam of Allah Azza wa Jal, the orders of Allah Azza wa Jal. Then it comes the patience of the elite, which are known, the people who have recognized Allah Azza wa Jal, the arifin. Arifin are those people who have recognized their true existence in this world, and they've recognized their connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And their patience develops due to love, right? It's two opposite things. I mean, patience on one side, and then you're having patience because you love. You love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You love the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal. At that time, practicing patience in difficulties becomes easier than doing other things which do not involve any type of difficulty. So the difficult situation becomes easier for you to practice. And in fact, when you are afflicted by a situation where it requires for you to have patience, that patience becomes the moment of happiness for you, right? A scholar, because remember one thing, there is a difference between asking for calamity, and number two is to bear the calamity with happiness, right? And that's what the patient of Arif is, that he has patience because he loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when that difficulty, when that situation, when he's afflicted by a condition, then that becomes the happiness. That becomes a moment of joy for them. And that's what you see in the life of the pious, in the life of Anbiya alayhim salam, the Sahaba, the Tabi'un, the people of piety and taqwa. They practice such a patience that you can never imagine, that they're happy with the things that they have lost in their lives more than they're happy with the things that are kept in their life. Ansar Medina came to the Prophet ﷺ and they said, Ya Rasulullah, what you take for your deen, it's more beloved to us than the things that you leave behind for us to utilize for ourselves. So that is the highest category of sabr. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us amongst the people who are getting closer to Allah Azza wa Jal and having to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and practicing patience in their lives. As the world progresses and things become very easy accessible, the tolerance of patience kind of decreases, right? Before, you were able to have patience because things were happening gradually. And now things are happening rapidly. A person loses patience even over a small thing. So to practice patience is one of the greatest ibadah in the sight of Allah Azza wa Jal. May Allah grant us understanding. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.